Thank you very much, and I'm thrilled to be here with the Right Honourable the Baroness McGregor-Smith CBE, who I've been told we can call Ruby this evening.
Yes.
Just to go over that incredible CV again, you're the former Chief Executive of Mighty Group, which is one of the country's biggest outsourcing companies, a role you took in 2007 and you held until 2016. At that point, when you left, you told the Financial Times a decade is enough to run a listed stock.
Certainly is.
You took the top job when you were 44, and at that time you were the only Asian female chief executive of a FTSE 250, and that is still the case today. It was a sprawling group whose workers kept and they still keep Britain running, everything from pest control to cleaning to government detention centres to prisons and receptionists and all those services we all depend on. And on your watch, revenues grew and the group expanded into new fields. You were awarded the CBE in 2012 for services to business and promoting diversity. You became a Conservative Life Peer in 2015, and you're the former chair and member of the Women's Business Council. So I'm going to ask you a very general question to start, and it almost seems like a daft question, but I think it matters because a lot of people wonder why diversity matters to business.
I think when I look back, I often reflect on the fact that having run such a large group, predominantly blue-collar group as well, with 65,000 staff of every nationality you can imagine, doing so much work around buildings and infrastructure such as this. It always struck me that when I went to things like, for example, CBI's dinner, the only people that look like me are the waiters, actually, you know. And you walk in and you sort of look at it and you go, so where are the role models, really, for the next generation in particular, for people from all different backgrounds, and for more women and for more operational roles? How do you convince females that they can do anything, give them all this great aspiration when there are next to no people that they can actually look at in business and really admire? So I think it matters from a real role model and aspirational perspective, but I think as well there's a real economic imperative to do it. So when I did my report on race in the workplace for the government 2 years ago, we said that if we had equal participation of BAME individuals in the UK, that there'd be a £24 billion boost to the UK economy. And if you do the same on women, it's around 150 odd billion boost to the economy too. So you've got a big economic imperative to try and say, you know, we can do more. Then I guess my final point on why it matters is we keep saying in Britain that we have a skill shortage. Well, we don't have a skill shortage, actually. We just don't look deeply enough for the skills that we actually want, because I think it's absolutely there in spades, but so many people feel so disadvantaged in the workplace and not recognised for the skills they bring. So for me, that's why it matters.
So going back to that report and the 24 billion figure, that 24 billion, the report said, was due to poor practices. What is stopping us? What do businesses get wrong?
So we say that we're all equal opportunities employers. Well, if we are, then the gender pay gap analysis shows that we're not quite as equal as we think we are. And on race, we've got a number of challenges. First, we've got bias. We call it unconscious bias because that's a nice way of saying we really don't want to do very much with certain parts of our population, actually. But we've got kind of quite conscious bias going on as well around the types of individuals we want to employ. We all are biased, but hopefully the biases aren't ones that hold people back. But in this case of race, I think they very much are. I think depending on your background, you see different individuals of different races doing better in some spheres than others. But I think for me it's around bias, it's around recruitment practices, it's around the fact that we like to surround ourselves with people that are similar to us. The challenge with that, when you've got a big minority group, is that, well, how do they ever feel welcome if no one's ever prepared to take a chance? And it's the risk aversion, I think, that hits many organisations in the public and private the sector. I mean, last year on the civil service fast track scheme for the government, not one BAME person was hired. And you go, well, how can that be the case? Lots must have applied. And when you go through the processes being used now to hire individuals for the civil service, it doesn't really make a lot of sense because they have great aspiration to be the most inclusive employer. They've rolled out all these new practices, yet they're not hiring anyone. So something in those recruitment practices aren't working. And we're going to face an even bigger challenge on this soon with AI, because with more AI practices coming in, someone somewhere is sitting devising those AI practices. And I'll tell you what, if they're devising what we've already got, we're not going to change a lot, are we? So I think recruitment, and actually just people feeling really comfortable and being welcoming. I mean, the country's moved on a lot, I think, in the last 10 years in terms of, today we have networks for women, on race, on LGBT, there's much more inclusion being discussed, whereas when I first became a CEO, that was pretty rare. I don't know about all of you, I certainly didn't have any networks because there weren't any. So from that perspective, we've moved, but it's still not delivering great change in the workplace.
We'll talk a bit about your early life. You were born in India, as we said, and you moved to the UK when you were 2. You grew up in central London and West London. What was it like, and did you encounter racism and sexism growing up?
I think anyone who came to the UK in the 60s who looked a bit different probably didn't have the most helpful, memorable childhood experiences when it comes to race. I was the only Asian girl at my primary school. That's a pretty difficult thing to deal with. But actually it's quite interesting because although I obviously would have suffered in some respects, some would argue that was probably the making of me because I had to learn how to fit into British society because my entire society was English in North London and I had to be part of that world if I wanted any friends. So I had to adapt. And certainly I remember when I was doing my race review, a young black engineer was talking to me and I was explaining how I felt I understood the challenges he had faced. He said, I didn't. He said, because you adapted when you were a kid. I didn't walk into a workplace and not understand it. And for many individuals with a BAME background, they're walking into workplaces where they just don't fit. And they've grown up in much less integrated pockets of cities where they suddenly walk into this very traditional workplace and it's just not something they've ever been part of before. And so, yes, it was challenging, but, at the end of the day, I got through it.
And you went to university, you trained as an accountant, and then you graduated into Thatcher's Britain, and you joined outsourcing companies.
Yeah.
So tell me how that influenced your career.
I think for me, it was around, I joined, when I was leaving BDO, many of my friends were joining big brands, and I met a group of people I quite liked, who I thought I could work with quite well. In the middle of having been based in central London, Sunbury-on-Thames in a warehouse was a bit of a shock with no windows, but actually I really liked the people, and it was a fast-growing group called Serco, and had only started 3-4 years earlier, and they were really entrepreneurial, and I really liked the way they thought. But actually that was probably the making of my career, because I was about to join a very fast-growing sector. I had no idea, A, what outsourcing was, B, what defence outsourcing was, so I went to meet them. But I joined on the finance side, and we grew really significantly over the 9 years I was there. So I remember when I joined, our revenues were 80 million. By the time I left, they were over $1 billion. When I joined, we were a UK-centric defence company. By the time I left, we were global. I'd had the opportunities to work overseas. I'd had the opportunities when I was very young to do some really senior roles because they focused on talent, because most people who were coming out qualifying as accountants or graduates weren't going to Serco, they were going to the big brands. So those of us that decided to go and take a bit more of a perceived risk, actually did quite well. And my whole sector is full of individuals from very, very normal backgrounds who've done incredibly well, which is rare, but because it was a very fast-growing sector and had to focus on talent and actually employed a lot of people with more blue-collar skills, but who've actually made really great transitions into senior management.
And Do you think if you'd have joined one of those traditional brands, or if you'd have gone into law, or if you'd have worked for a more traditional company, do you think that you would have had the same level of success?
Oh God, no, never. It would never have happened, because I even found it doing chartered accountancy. Very set practices, very set in their ways about what they expect you to be. I needed to go and join something entrepreneurial, with individuals prepared to let me be me. No, it wouldn't have happened. And let alone places like banking, it would have been, well, actually, been horrific. I would have enjoyed it. But I think also it's about the fact that I had to go and work with organisations where I really liked the work. I found audit really dull, quite frankly. It was not the most exciting of careers for me. I really enjoyed the work I did at Serco, at Mighty.
Do you think this is a British problem?
I think in Britain there's quite a lot about class. People often ask me, where did you go to school? And I'm really horrified to find I went through the state school system. Because they're like, what, you mean, what, you didn't go to Oxford? You didn't? And I'm like, no. I have actually just finished at Oxford, actually. I finally went last year. I finally proved I could do it to myself. But it certainly wasn't me at that age, and I never had those sorts of opportunities. And I didn't have great state education, so I found it quite difficult. But I think that you have to tick so many boxes normally to get anywhere, that the only places you don't have to is probably startups and fast entrepreneurial growing companies who have a lot less boxes to tick. And so my advice to all youngsters is go to those companies if you want to achieve real success. I always found they were far more fun, personally.
And what would your advice be to employers?
If you want to attract the best talent, you've got to go a lot further than you're going. You're too prescriptive with your methodology about what makes a great individual. Take some risks on people. Don't go outside the conventional norms. When Mighty hired me, I'd never been a PLC director. As they said to me, we'll teach you how to do the PLC piece. They had to do it, but I hadn't done it before. Most job specifications, when you look at them, want prior experience. So you're a bit stuffed if you haven't got it. That doesn't make sense. You should be prepared to say, actually, we can teach you. If we look, it might be a new role, but we can teach you and support you and mentor you through that.
And just going back to those years at Serco and then at Mighty, did you encounter racial discrimination?
No.
Never?
Not that I noticed. Maybe, I don't know, maybe, I got asked questions at my interview about, are you sure you can do this job if you've got 2 young children? Yes. To become CFO at Mighty, my husband's here, they did make us both go down for Sunday lunch so they could see what he was like, to see if he'd support me. It's not very normal with my children to check the children were good children. You do Sunday lunch with a 6 and a 4-year-old with a group of people. It was okay, Graham, from I remember. It was all right. But so it was a little bit unconventional, but no.
And how about sexism?
I think I was quite young at the time to do the roles I was doing, so I think there was a lot of protective kind of, she's quite young, isn't she? Needs a bit more support, Will.
How old were you when you first had a senior role?
Oh, so at Serco, my early 30s. So you are, that is young, and I was CFO at Mighty at 39. That's young in FTSE terms. So everyone just assumes that you're very, your boards are a lot older. I think the average age of the board was a lot older at Mighty than when I joined. So I was one of the youngsters, which surprised them. So they're very protective as opposed to realising that you can actually do the role.
Did you ever have a moment of self-doubt?
No. Not on the roles I did. I mean, lots of self-doubt about lots of things, more probably around being a mum, actually. I think personally, always. I don't know. I don't think I did I, Graham? I don't think I'm really like that. I'm not a very deep thinker, so I wouldn't. No.
So we hear a lot about imposter syndrome, and lots of women are troubled by it.
No.
What would you say to a young woman who's suffering from imposter syndrome?
Don't reflect too deeply. It's not worth it. I'm not a deep reflective soul. I don't really understand. And it's really helps if you're not. And if you can just ignore it all and ignore that kind of inner voice that tells you can't do something. Of course I get it occasionally, I don't think about it. And that's quite rare, I think, for a lot of females I know.
So you entered the House of Lords in 2015. Were you made to feel welcome?
You know, I mean, I'm sure if I'd been to private school, it would have felt a bit more normal because of the way it works. But no, they are incredibly warm, incredibly welcoming, very supportive. I was given my first female mentor, never had that before, to help guide me, who'd come from the world of business to help me understand. They could find someone that could speak my language more. There aren't that many business people in the House of Lords, and everyone was very welcoming.
What's the importance of the role of mentors, particularly in promoting diversity?
I think you've got two things. You've got mentoring and you've got sponsorship. So I think it's really important to have a good mentor, maybe someone that's been there and seen it and done it, who you can bounce any concerns or worries you have, but actually can give you advice. But actually I think what's even more important is sponsorship, because if actually you're sponsored in your career, then you've always got someone that's going to support you and help promote you one day. Because I always worry one has to be with the other. So mentoring's great, but you can make someone feel really great. But if you've got a promotion for them, they're not going to feel great for too long. So you've got to be able to do both.
Who are your biggest mentors and sponsors? I
think certainly the two CEOs I work for. So Richard White at Serco, who gave me my first big kind of promotion at Serco, and then I've got to say David Helling, who was a chair, who we sadly lost the year after I joined Mighty, and Ian Stewart, the chief exec when I joined.
So they were all senior men?
Yeah. Very different to me.
They had this young Asian woman that they were putting into a senior role. They must have had a lot of faith in you.
Yeah, well, to be fair, the Mighty team, when they met me, they obviously listened to my name and they thought I was a red-headed Scottish woman, so that was interesting. So I remember meeting Ian at the Institute of Directors, and I could see him wandering around. I'm thinking, he doesn't realise it's me, you know. And he came and went, I really wasn't expecting that. And then, so that was quite interesting. That was the first time hadn't really thought about that too much. That actually, that's quite a big barrier for individuals with my background, is their name. So it wasn't in my case. So, but no, they're incredibly supportive, but also very good at explaining, always there if I needed them. And particularly Ian Stewart, I think, who all the way through, you know, when I was CFO working for him, even as CEO, I would speak to him most weeks.
And this was in the 1990s?
No, so Richard, I worked at Serco from 91 to 2000, then Mighty 2002 onwards.
So, but it was before that sort of big generational change, this big, that we've witnessed really in the past probably 5 years. And you said something quite prescient in an interview with the Financial Times.
Oh gosh.
Back in 2015, I think you said to my colleague that there was a generational change coming and that you could sense it in 2015 around diversity.
Well, absolutely, because I think I was really lucky because the individuals I work for actually were really happy to embrace, you know, at Mighty, I think as well, because it's the services group, you get a lot more women working in the service industry. And so a lot of the guys I know have worked with women in the service industry. They've always had women of some description who've become quite senior. So they were, it was new, but they were kind of used to working with women at a more senior level. But I do think generationally, you know, I look at my children with Graham, it wouldn't occur to them that they couldn't do, you know, male or female, that they couldn't do something. And that women are like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean there's barriers in the workplace? It is changing. I think there's a lot of pressure, I think, particularly from young people entering the workforce as to what is happening here. My daughter asked me about the gender pay gap when she was looking at organisations to work for. You know, those things are changing things.
What did you do at Mighty to ensure that women and ethnic minorities rose to senior positions to help?
It's really hard. So even when you're a chief executive, you've got a big organisation, you've got your own challenges because you've got your pipeline has come from wherever it's come from. Whether I had engineering and security businesses, which were very male-dominated. Trying to get the females to take senior roles in security was actually, we had one female MD in London, but it was quite tough because not many found it very attractive. And trying to find the women to take senior roles in engineering was also quite difficult because it was quite male-dominated. And then we'd have the opposite in cleaning, the opposite in care. You'd have, it depended on where you worked. Immigration centres, another really tough environment, you know, so that attracts only certain individuals that want to work in those industries. So what we did was we set up networks around each of the kind of protected characteristics. We worked extensively when I joined Mighty with Business in the Community. I was really adamant we had to be one of the big, sustainable, responsible employers. So we did a huge amount around apprenticeships. We set up a charitable foundation to work with some of the most disadvantaged in different areas of the UK, because our ethos was around providing opportunity to those that wouldn't normally get it. And we also, my executive team was 30% female. And that was a female CFO. So we were the only female CEO, CFO in the team in the FTSE, which was pretty odd for fund managers. So 14 years of roadshows, I probably met 3 female fund managers here in the US, and they very rarely got to meet 2 females in a room with them. And a female HR director and a couple of our 2 or 3 of our senior execs were female. But again, you forever can only do so much. So by the end of it, I'd come to the conclusion that the best way to deal with it was to make me and my exec team do even more. We were happy to be incentivized on it. So we said whether it's our share schemes, whether it's, we want part of our incentives for all our teams to be based around this. And it's quite interesting because RBS have done this. And it's amazing how many more females have been promoted. Now, the guys' bonuses depend on it a bit more. You know, actually, there's something in it for them as opposed to it just being the good thing to do. And I do think it's around how you link, because I think it ultimately helps performance, so it should be an incentive plan. And that's still quite rare.
Is it the only way, incentives?
If you're running a FTSE, I think it's a key part of it. You can do all the things you want culturally, but ultimately management teams are incentivised to do things financially, and it's a big key driver of what they do. And if they don't achieve their kind of performance, they're not going to be there for very long anyway. So I think it's really important for fund managers and institutions to recognise that long-term performance is around diversity too, and that should be part of it. You're only just beginning to see, as an example now, it's only this year that the investor institutions are talking about climate change. You've got to go, why has it taken so long? For investment houses to say, we want to know what you're doing on climate change. In all the years I was at Mighty, I was never asked about climate change, and I was never asked about diversity by my shareholder group. So if the people that are employing me ultimately never ask me about these things, it's going to slip down, unless you've got a personal interest in it like I had, it's going to slip down your area of importance. If they're only going to ask you about 5 things, they're going to be key priorities. So you need it to come from the top always. And so the basic didn't come from the top, I put some of it in myself.
What's your view on quotas?
Well, I was always and I've said this quite publicly, particularly around women, pretty anti-quota, because I felt, it can also drive the wrong outcomes. But I have to say, in 2019, when I look at the lack of progress on executive positions for women and on BAME, even I'm beginning to think maybe we might need them for a short time just to kind of shake the system up, which is not like me. But I think it's because I've been talking about diversity for a decade, and it's still quite frustrating to watch the lack of progress. I personally think it might help for a bit in Britain, which is new for me.
Which is new for you, yes.
But I just sort of feel that, I'd like to see, at the moment we're saying in the UK, we're not going to close the gender pay gap at board level till 2043. And across the world, we're saying it's going to take us 2 centuries for the global gender pay gap. On that basis, I'd really like to see more in my lifetime. So if quotas help shift that, I'd be up for it. It's taken too long.
I'd like to go back a bit and think about the things in your career that made a difference to you. What was your big break?
I just think at Serco, I was made finance director of Serco Limited, which was about 80% of the group at the time. It was the confidence the board had in me to do that role that made me realise I could do well. I think it's great when people, I need people to believe in me, for me to believe in myself. So that was probably the first big one, and then obviously joining Mighty.
And you took a career break to focus on your children. Tell us about that.
For me, it was a little bit difficult at the time to juggle everything. Graham was working in private equity. We were both doing too much travelling. Had 2 children in 2 years. It all got too much. So I wanted to stop for a while, which I did. And it was good just to have some time. And my little boy was quite ill when he was born. So I think I underestimated when we had children how chaotic life could be and what little sleep we got. And it was just good to have some time to kind of regroup until Alex went to school.
Tell us a bit about what it's like to be a chief executive. We rarely hear about this. I mean, I've interviewed lots of chief executives and they talk about, they're happy to talk about numbers and they're happy to talk about their achievements, but they don't generally talk about the actual day-to-day experience of being a chief executive, dealing with that pressure and how you do it. Or they don't talk honestly about it.
I mean, everyone's going to have a very different experience of the kind of company they run and what they do. I will forever say I was very fortunate that I worked with a great team. We had a huge amount of fun, as well as it being incredibly hard, incredibly pressurised, probably always feeling very tired. It didn't feel as though I was getting up every day to have an exhausting day. I was growing a business and I got a real buzz out of that with my teams. But it was a real team effort. It wasn't just about me at all. I felt we did everything together. And so, although many people say they're very lonely jobs, mine didn't feel as lonely because I had a great group of people I was working with to kind of achieve some really big aims and ambitions. So it was fantastic, but it was extraordinarily tiring, I would say. So weekends were around recovery, holidays were around sleeping and getting my head together. And when you come out of it, you realise how much of normal life, you're convinced while you're doing it that of course you can manage everything. It's only when you stop that you realise how much normality passed you by. How many concerts we didn't get to, how many times we didn't get to hang out with friends, as you thought. I don't feel I missed out with the children particularly because I was running a UK company. I wouldn't have done a global global CEO role, but that's a personal thing, so I wouldn't want to be away from my children.
Because travelling is a huge part of that role.
Yeah, I mean, I sat on the Michael Page board and the CEO there would travel for a significant part of the year. I wouldn't do that as a mum. So for me, and that was more down to me, I just missed them too much. So that wasn't part of what I could do, so I could only do a certain role. I couldn't have continued really at Serco because it was global either. So I made my choice around what I thought I could do. But it was huge fun, but it's hugely exhausting. It's all a juggle. It's way harder work than people ever explain, and it's 24 hours a day.
Why do you think people don't talk about how much work it is?
I guess they probably think it's quite obvious that it's all the time. You know, when you're running a service group like mine, and you've got contracts with 24-hour KPIs, anything can go wrong. Normally when I watch the news, if there was some service issue somewhere, like, I don't know, a leak on the some water leak on the underground or some security issue somewhere, I go, oh my God, we're bound to be involved, or some of our staff might be there. So you're automatically on high alert in the service world. And we all took our responsibilities incredibly seriously, so you're very intensely involved all the time. But I don't know, I guess people are different. I've always said to people it's just a really hard juggle and it's tough, but it's fun.
Do you think leaders should come with an expiry date? Do you think we perhaps ask too much of them?
Well, I certainly didn't want to do it for any longer. I probably did it for too long, but you do get very tired. I mean, the average FTSE tenure is about 4 years, and I did just under 10. So You're kind of, and you don't realise at the time because it all becomes very normal. But it's only when you stop that you realise maybe some of it was a little bit abnormal as to how much you tried to cram in the week. Extreme. Yeah, I feel a lot younger again. But,
So what's your leadership style? What's it like to work for you?
I'm a real team person. It was always about the team. It was rarely about me. I'm kind of quite low ego too, so I was much more inclined to just work really well with a great team of people and actually make it enjoyable and be very normal. But be a very close-knit group of people with everybody, and also be very open. I'm an unusually open soul. I always have been. I also think when I was more junior in organisations, I kind of struggled with cultures that weren't open, that weren't inclusive, that weren't fun, that weren't, where I didn't want to be a chief exec that was never seen. I never had an office, just hot desk, wherever. That was me because I didn't want to be that had come before, really.
Do you think that we, as senior women, maybe our instincts are not to have the corner office, to sit with everybody, to do those things, but are we doing ourselves a disservice?
I don't know, because I was in an industry where I was basically didn't have an office at Circa, and I was trained to hot desk because we were non-hierarchical. So if you believe in a non-hierarchical approach to business, even though there is hierarchy in business, then you've got to lead by example. So I don't know the answer because I've never had one for 20 years. So, and I still don't really. I kind of hot desk wherever I go. I'm so used to it. Does anyone have offices now? I don't know. Maybe people. I wouldn't know how to operate in one.
They do at the FT.
It would be horrendous to be. And also, most of my clients were moving more and more to open plan. And I always found it very strange when I'd go and see some of them, and their executive teams would be. I'd be like, what are you all doing in this space? I mean, would you ever talk to anybody if you're in an office? I don't know. And I'm like quite chatty, so I like to be with the teams anyway.
And how about conflict? Because a big part of running an organisation is dealing with conflict.
Yes.
How did you approach that?
What kind of conflict?
Staff conflict, or having to relay difficult decisions or make unpopular decisions?
Oh, I mean, I had everything. So I was, in 2012, I announced I was shutting a third of the group. So in engineering construction, we pulled out of all the market. That was horrendous. I mean, it was a core part of what Mighty had done when it first started, but I knew it couldn't continue. I found that's awful. But actually, you have to find that awful. I don't think you can be human and do that. You've got to have really bad times as well. So if you're restructuring groups or if you're cutting things, it's got to. Good God, it felt painful. It was awful. I wouldn't want to, and I actually really dislike having to do those things. I'll do them if I have to, but I'm just not a fan of doing it at all.
Do you think that you came under greater scrutiny from the media and from your peers because you were an Asian woman in a senior position than you would have done had you not been?
I'm sure the answer to that is yes. I probably at the time didn't think about it because you're in the job. But yes, way too much media attention because I look a bit different. Way too many photographs of me everywhere because I look different. And put a small picture in a guy and give me a whole page when I've never, it was just a bit, it's just the way the media is, I think, with anything that's different.
How did it make you feel?
I think I felt I think it was quite intrusive to begin with. And then I didn't look at it. I thought it was easier just not to look at it.
Do you think that black and minority ethnic women in senior positions get more attention? Generally?
I think they get more extremes, so they get positive commentary and then more negative commentary. If you're on a public stock, you get both anyway. I ran a blue-collar outsourcing group. I was going to get flack, because you always do, because you're outsourcing. It's always about the public persona of outsourcing, which has had some challenging times. Many of my teams would say, yes, I did. I'm not a deep thinker, so I didn't. It was best not to reflect too much on it. It is kind of what it is in Britain today. And if you do worry about those things too much, I don't think you can do the job. I think you've just got to accept that that just goes with the job. I underestimated how much of that did come with the job. So when I first became a CEO and I had to do an interview, I was horrified they start asking me about my family, about where I'd grown up. I was like, why do you need to know all these things? And I hadn't really realised that those things would be asked about. I thought they'd leave all that alone, but they don't. They're really interested, and I had to get used to people being interested.
If you could imagine yourself as a young teenager in West London, or if you imagine a teenage girl in West London with Asian heritage growing up now in 2019 at a state school with parents who are first-generation immigrants, what would you say to her?
Be as rebellious as I was and aim for do what you want to do, but get the help to help you get there, and be aspirational, because you have the potential, but you've got to help find the people who can help you realise the potential. Have a plan. Although I didn't have much for one myself at the beginning, but no, and then and work in different industries, and don't get and take a risk. You know, go to the young start-up organisations that people have never heard of, because a decade on they'll be incredible organisations, and you'll have been part of that success.
Is the government doing enough to support this generation?
Gosh, that's a big question. I don't know if any government can do enough to support any it's very easy to be critical. I tend to take the view that you can, as government, do so much. Where you can be very influential is on policy, supporting different individuals to help fulfil their aspiration. I think they have the aspiration. I don't think they always have the mechanisms to help deliver.
Well, what has worked? What in terms of government policy has worked?
On diversity.
On social mobility as well.
I think on diversity, we're only just really starting. So I think the gender pay gap starts a conversation. It doesn't actually change anything, but it gives us data, which I think we need to say, these are the challenges, and then it expects organisations to explain what they're going to do about it, and that's a bit of a first, and we should be doing that on ethnicity too, and other protected characteristics. Because if we don't have the data, then people don't really want to do anything anyway. So you need really good information, you need a plan. So I think from that perspective we've done more. We've done more on flex working, shared parental leaves come in, albeit culturally still not very taken up by many men yet, but hopefully that would change gradually. And social mobility, I think, remains a real challenge. And I think there's a lot that can be done, but still needs to be thought through in terms of policy terms. But we're certainly, I remember when I first started chairing the Women's Business Council in 2012, we were coming up with, we need flexible working for women to be a norm. A few years, 2019, I know more that take those options up. I see more flexibility. People are braver about asking for it and realising it won't hurt their careers so much. It shouldn't hurt your career at all if you need to be flexible. As long as you get the job done, it doesn't really matter how you do it. And I think technology helps with that as well. But I still think there's a long way to go, because we only have a handful of females running listed companies or private companies. We've got, if you take a look at the executive pipeline in Britain, I think it's currently going backwards, not forwards. Part of that could be because it's tougher economic times, but equally so, there's not enough that's being done at pace. It's coming, but I'm a little bit impatient for the changes that I still think we need to make.
And some of those figures, the gender pay gap, just to remind ourselves, is 11.9%, barely budged over a year. When it was first reported in 2018, it was 11.8%, and there are no sectors where women are paid the same as men. And that we also have a BAME pay gap, black and minority ethnic pay gap, estimated in 2018 by the Resolution Foundation to be, in some sectors, as high as 17%. Do we need the same sort of legislation around reporting that we've had with gender pay?
Oh, completely. I mean, I recommended that 2 years ago. BEIS have done a consultation on that, and the government's currently deciding what it wants to do about that. We've got to introduce the ethnicity pay gap. It's a natural follow-on in the same way from gender. It would surprise me if it doesn't come in. In fact, it would be very disappointing if it doesn't come in. And actually, companies are geared up to wanting to do it now. Because I think that people just take the view, look, we're going to do it for one, we better do it for others. You know, we haven't even discussed disability. You know, how we think about disability in the workplace, the challenges faced by those with any kind of either physical or mental impairment. There is so much more still to be done on all of that. So we have to do it.
In 2017, you were appointed to the House of Lords EU Market Committee, which looks at the impact of EU regulation on business. Talk a bit about that and tell us about Brexit. And are you optimistic or pessimistic? Do you think that black and ethnic minority people in this country and women in this country will be better or worse off when we leave the European Union?
The work's been really interesting because it explains to me the workings, I guess, of the European Union more. And I've been out to Brussels to understand kind of the strategy on space. We've done a huge amount of work on that. The latest time directive through to impact on certain business groups by leaving the European Union. And so it's been really interesting to get a variety of views, and we've also been looking at how ready the different government departments are as we look to leave. I think it's going to be very difficult to answer your question, because I think part of the challenge on this is, I think it's more about economic prosperity. If we're very economically prosperous, I think we're going to have more opportunities, and we'll invest more in the underrepresented talent. What tends to happen if you don't have the money, is you cut those wonderful initiatives first of all, and that's a challenge at the moment. So I think it's still very difficult to judge. You know, I've always said publicly I was a bit of a reluctant Remain individual on the basis purely because of the amount of money it's going to cost to actually do what we're trying to do. But you know, the decision's been made. Let's see how that decision gets executed, but we still need to see a detailed plan, which I don't believe there is one today, of how we're actually going to leave, because it means so many things to different people, but actually we need a detailed operational plan of how we actually physically leave all the agreements we have, how we have a new trade deal with our biggest trading partner. Those things are still not clearly defined in enough detail, I think, to understand economically. Economically, the only forecasts I've seen, all of them, you know, the only positive one is predicated on a new trade deal being signed pretty soon. So, you know, if we're going to take an economic hit, that concerns me. That worries me around, because I think opportunity is quite dependent upon economic prosperity.
Do you think the referendum in 2016 was a mistake?
I don't know. I'm sure everyone has their own view on it. It is what it is. I'm clearly not a fan of it, but equally so, at the time the government made the decisions it made to decide to have one. I wasn't part of that history to understand the details to why. I'm just seeing the aftermath of it, which has been pretty sad actually, because I think there's a lot we can do. But everyone's very consumed with this one piece, which I think is a real shame.
Can you learn to be a leader, or is it something that is innate?
I think you've got to have the right support from when you're pretty young. And I didn't know one day I'd ever had the ambition to run a FTSE company, but I ended up running one. And over that time, I had a huge amount of mentoring and support from the people I worked for. So my view is, absolutely, you learn more and more skills, and your leadership skills develop as you get more senior anyway, and you learn hopefully good things from those that you learn from. But you've got to be quite, I think you've got to like people. You've got to enjoy talking to people, being with people, presenting to people. I didn't really like presentations. I had to learn to really do that and be comfortable doing that. But you've got to enjoy, certainly in my world, you've got to enjoy running a people business, which means you've got to get on with people and like people, because it's a major part of what you do, and your leadership style is very personal to all of them. And so you've got to be able to talk to them about anything. You've got to want to do that. You've got to want to spend the time with the teams, or they won't think you're any good at all.
Were your parents confident people?
I think so. I think my mum's always been, I have two sisters, and she's never really felt any of us fulfilled our potential. She's still kind of hugely ambitious for the three of us. But that's my mum. Yeah, I would suggest yes, very confident. I think also because my dad came here in his early 20s to do chartered accountancy. My mum came a year later with me when I was 1. Not many people choose to leave, the country they've grown up with to come to Britain to forge a better future for themselves, unless they do have some innate sense of confidence about themselves.
You say your sisters have done well too. They're high achievers.
We're all accountants originally. Mum and Dad were very into you've got to have professional qualification, particularly because your background, because it's going to help you.
I've got time for one more question. I found, when I was researching for this evening, I found an interview with the Financial Times, many interviews with the Financial Times, but one in particular in 2016, which was the interview you gave when you stepped down, and you said, "I have craved my whole life to fit in, and I have never quite managed it." But this struck me as interesting because you are someone who's firmly made it inside the establishment today. You've made it into the House of Lords. So do you still feel that? Or do you still feel like an outsider?
When I said that, it was around the fact that you want to fit in, but ultimately you can't fit in because you look different, you are different, and people perceive you to be different, and that you desperately want to be part of what they've been. But I was born in India. I came here, and from the day I was at school, I never kind of fitted into the conventional norms. My ex-CFO, Suzanne, always told me it was about time I started realising standing out was great, because loads of people would be desperate to stand out and be noticed. And she said, "Why aren't you like that? Why have you spent..." And I said, I don't know, maybe it's just my character. I've always wanted to be part of something. But in the end, I gave up and accepted I'm not really. And so now I don't have that craving so much. I just take the view I am what I am. But I certainly don't feel part of any establishment. I'm not establishment. I mean, supposedly I am with what I've been given, but I'll never feel establishment.
Baroness McGregor-Smith, Ruby, thank you very much.
Thank you.